Formula One cheating scandal exposed. Wow, it gets interesting. So this is your daily F1 news. I'm Tony Craig, and if you are an F1 fan, then of course you're in the right place. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. Make sure you hit the notification bell so you can stay up to date with all our content. And if you do enjoy the video, please smash a like on the video as well. It makes a huge difference to the success of the channel and our little community. Right, let's get into it. So, Formula One, it's always been the same, right? All teams are always trying to bend the rules, and occasionally you get a bit of a whistleblower. Now, this whistleblower came from an unlikely source. Fernando Alonso basically hinted at this straight after Sao Paulo. So Fernando Alonso suspected that some of the midfield teams are playing around with the ride heights. Okay. And then he goes on to say, I can't be completely honest, but everyone's improved a lot. Now, what he's basically saying is he can't speak too much about it because he's going to get in trouble. And he's basically said that the teams in the midfield have got a good chance of dodging FIA checks since they're only carried out on the top 5 and 2 randomly selected cars. Now, what he's talking about there, we're talking about the plank that sits underneath a Formula One car. And the checks that are carried out are on how much that plank wears throughout the course of a Grand Prix. Now, just to be clear, if you haven't seen one of these before, let me show you what he's talking about. So, on a Formula One car, underneath you have the skid blocks and plank. Now, they're two different things making up the same piece. As you can see under the F1 car there, you see that kind of yellowy plank all the way to the end. That is called the plank. Now, within the plank, if you look in the little red circle, you've got these things called skid blocks. Now, the skid blocks are made out of titanium, okay, and the plank's basically made out of some sort of wood composite. And the idea is, if you lose 1 millimeter of thickness throughout the Grand Prix, then the car is deemed to be illegal. We saw it with Lewis Hamilton back in China, and we've seen it with many cars over the years. Now, why do we have the plank? Something that I think is important to note. So back in '94, Ayrton Senna, Roland Ratzenberger both lost their lives at Imola, and that provoked a change because back in those days, less regulations. Ayrton Senna was driving for Williams. Williams had just lost their active suspension. They deemed that to be illegal for the '94 season. So everyone was messing around with ride heights. The problem is, if the ride height's too low, when you hit maximum downforce on certain circuits, it's imagine like a skimming stone bouncing off the ground, losing traction, and then you see these high-speed crashes. Now at Imola, we saw 3 terrible accidents. We saw Ruben Barrichello in a terrible accident, but he was okay. Roland Ratzenberger in qualifying, it was a fatality. And then, of course, the death of Ayrton Senna in the race. And after that, they said, right, ride height is an issue with Formula One cars. And that was when, in 1994, they decided we're going to introduce these planks. Now, these planks have been there for all that time, and it's been a regulation to ensure that cars don't run too low. Now, what's been going on this year is because we're running an era of the ground effect era where you get better ground effect, which means more grip the lower the car runs. That's been the challenge for the teams all season. Ferrari haven't really managed to crack it. They designed a car that was quite good actually at the designed ride height. Unfortunately, by the end of the Grand Prix, plank wear was an issue. And what we've seen throughout the season is teams seem to have solved, like Red Bull, look at their massive improvement. They're running at a ride height. They're always deemed legal. And it's because teams have seemed to have solved the ride height issue. But how have they done it? And is it cheating? So let's take a look at what happened after Sao Paulo. So we've seen the accusation from Fernando Alonso, and then we bring the receipts. So Joe Bauer investigated some of these ride heights after Sao Paulo. And he basically discovered that because the skid blocks, they're using titanium skid blocks that expand with the heat. What happens is that means the skid blocks within the plank, you saw the ones in the little red circle, that metal part of the plank expands, and that's the bit that hits the ground where you see all the sparks. But when you heat those up, they expand. basically means that it's the skid blocks that's grinding on the floor. The plank doesn't get any wear, and it allows them to run the ride height of the car lower. Now, what Joe Bauer has basically said is there are devices or chemical reactions, I don't know how they're doing it, that have been attached to the car to basically provide heat into the skid blocks to make them expand and retract by the time they get to Parc Fermé and scrutineering. So during the Grand Prix, the heat gets into the skid block, and it's supposed to be, a 1 centimeter thickness. They're expanding, taking all of the wear throughout the Grand Prix, and then as they cool down at the end of the Grand Prix, it's meaning that when they're measured for plank wear, there is no plank. They're legal. There has not been a 1 millimeter wear on the plank from the measurement holes, which is actually quite genius. I mean, Formula One will always find a solution, right? But is it cheating? Well, this story is really coming out from Japan, and Autosport Japan basically say this. So let's get into their article. So what they basically say is the FIA technical representative Joe Bauer decided to check whether all skid blocks were in accordance with the rules before qualifying, as 2 or 3 cars were hit by intense bottoming in the sprint race. Bauer found devices attached to several machines for the purpose of heating the skid only and ordered them to be removed. I mean, this is crazy. Now, according to the same source, virtually all teams use this technology to varying degrees, which means some people are better at it than others. But they find a particularly effective method and use it on the circuits where the road surface is smooth and the vehicle height is extremely low, improving downforce. And it's said that basically most teams have been trying to find a way to exploit this regulation. And some teams are better at it than others. But what's the outcome of it? Well, the FIA are going to develop a technical directive prohibiting the use of certain materials on the bottom of the car body, but it's likely to take effect next year. But the only thing is, next year, the F1 new technical rules, ground effect is going to be significantly reduced, and we're actually going to be relying on mechanical grip. So is it still going to be an issue? Well, it's not going to be quite as much of an issue, but as you know, the plank's been was introduced because of the accidents back in '94. So the planks are always going to be there. They do want to prevent cars running at dangerously low ride heights so they don't skip off the road surface like a skimming stone, like we've seen in the past, which cause horrendous accidents. So it's a safety element that they're going to keep. But going into the 2026 regulations, is it going to be such a problem? Here's the thing. F1 teams will try and find a way to exploit the regulations to their advantage. And as Joe Bauer has said, most teams were thinking that an expandable skid block within the plate, the titanium skid block, is a solution. I think the regulations will say that there's something along the lines of the skid block, which is the titanium metal block that sits within the plank, will have to be rigid, that it cannot expand or decrease in size. Now, I don't know how they can police that during a Grand Prix, but they will be looking to prevent the exploitation of what is effectively a resizable part of the plank that can resize due to heat, take the wear and decrease to give the required 10 millimeter thickness of plank. I think they're going to try and do something to stop it. It seems like most teams have been looking for a way of exploiting that, because in the ground effect era, it's the lower the car is to the ground, the more effective the ground effect is, more effective the aero is to suck the car to the ground and give better downforce and better grip. So yeah, it is a scandal. It is cheating to most people, but I think there's a lot of people that think this is just F1 being F1, like trying to find a way to have an edge, and all within the elements of what is legal. Does it come down to interpretation of the rules? Now, I'm interested to know what you think. What are your thoughts on this? Do you think it's absolutely cheating, or do you think it's an interpretation of the rules that F1 teams are allowed to do to for their advantage to try and be more competitive? What is telling is that most teams to some degree are doing something along these lines, but some teams are obviously just better at it than others, right? So yeah, this cheating scandal is gonna go on. Is it going to be a problem in 26? I think it's always going to be a problem, really. Ride height is always going to come into effect and be a major part of how a car handles, whether it's a ground effect era, whether it's a different type of era. The lower the car sits to the ground, the car is effectively gonna handle better. So yeah, I think it's an interesting one. I think it's a story that's gonna gather momentum. I don't think the FIA want this story out there, because here's the other big thing: why are there only 5 cars plus 2 random cars being checked for the ride heights? Surely, in the pinnacle of motorsport, which is billions and billions of dollars, generating billions and billions of dollars, they can't have enough scrutineers to scrutinize every single entrant, every single car on the grid, and scrutinize each one effectively. Like, it's not like they're short of money. When the prize pool is over 1.2 billion for the teams, surely you can't take a few million out of that, or whatever it takes, to have 20 scrutineers, or 22 in 2026. There'll be 22 cars on the grid, where they have enough scrutineers to scrutinize every single car to ensure every single entrant is legal. If they do that, that will prevent people taking a chance in the midfield going, oh, do you know what? Maybe my car won't get checked. Every car should get checked that enters the Grand Prix, whether it's a P14 car or a P3 car. Every car should get checked. Surely what the FIA should be doing is, rather than, trying to improve the regulations, which they should be doing, they should be improving on how this sport is policed to improve the integrity of Formula One. Surely that's got to be part of the solution. Anyway, have your say in the comments below. Join me tonight at 7:30 for more F1 news, where you can get involved in a live stream, fully interactive. I hope to see you there. And if you have enjoyed the video, please do smash a like on the video. Subscribe if you haven't. And if you feel like doing anything else, like hyping it or sharing it, very, very much appreciated. So yeah, I will see you on the next one. Ta-ta.